What if I told you that one of the greatest engineering feats in human history wasn't built by Egypt, Babylon, or Rome, but by a kingdom barely the size of a modern city? What if the most impossible structure of the ancient world rose from a mountain in Jerusalem, built in absolute silence with stones weighing more than 400 tons, stones that modern cranes can barely lift? Today, you're about to enter the story behind a construction so grand, so mathematically precise, and so drenched in gold that even engineers and archaeologists admit we still don't know how they did it. Before we uncover the secrets buried under 3,000 years of dust, the silent quarries, the deadly transports, the gold-forging furnaces, and the miracle that appeared in the final moment, make sure you subscribe to Bible and History and hit the like button. Your support helps us bring more hidden biblical mysteries and ancient revelations to life. Share this video with someone who loves history, because what you're about to see is not legend, not myth, but the most extraordinary construction ever recorded, the Temple of Solomon. And the truth behind it is far more dramatic than you imagine. Solomon's temple rose with a kind of beauty and mystery that the world had never seen before. 30 meters high, its inner walls gleaming with 27 tons of pure gold, its towering bronze columns standing 8 meters tall and weighing 34 tons each. Everything about it felt like a declaration of glory. Massive cedar beams imported from distant Lebanon lined the walls. Polished cypress shone beneath the feet of anyone who dared walk inside. And in the heart of the sanctuary stood 2 giant cherubim, each 4.5 meters high, their wings covered in gold and stretched wide as if guarding something sacred beyond imagination. This was no ordinary building. It was the most expensive, most magnificent, and most technically advanced structure of the ancient world. It took 7 years to complete, consuming more gold than any other known construction of its time. Yet the true mystery lay not in the gold or the artistry, but in the stones beneath it. The foundation blocks weighed up to 400 tons each. No cranes, no metal pulleys, no modern wheels, just raw human strength and techniques that even today's engineers struggle to comprehend. How could people 3,000 years ago cut, move, and fit stones of such size with absolute precision? How did they accomplish what seems impossible even now? These questions still echo among historians and engineers who study the site. And the deeper we look, the more astonishing the story becomes. The first challenge in building the temple was simple to describe, but brutal to execute. Solomon did not want ordinary stones. He wanted the biggest ever cut in Israel. 1 Kings 5:17 calls them large and costly stones, and archaeological studies of the later Second Temple reveal blocks weighing more than 400 tons. That is the weight of 60 adult elephants carved from a mountain without dynamite, without electricity, without steel saws. 80,000 men were assigned to this single task: cutting stone. Every dawn they walked into mountain quarries surrounding Jerusalem, stepping into one of the deadliest workplaces of the ancient world. Precision was everything. You could not simply strike rock until it broke, not when the law required absolute silence at the construction site. 1 Kings 6:7 states that no sound of iron tools could be heard where the temple was being built. That meant every stone had to be shaped perfectly before leaving the quarry. Every angle, every surface, every measurement, completed far from Jerusalem. Their method was both ancient and brilliant. Stonecutters began by tracing lines with harder stones, marking exactly where they wanted the rock to split. Then they drilled small, deep holes along those lines. Into each hole, they inserted dry wooden wedges. When the wedges were drenched with water, the wood expanded slowly but powerfully, building pressure until the rock cracked, sometimes hours later, sometimes days, but always along the intended line. No explosions, no iron clashing against stone, only the dull, echoing sound of a mountain giving way. Yet that was only the beginning. Shaping the blocks required skilled workers who understood the architect's system of symbols carved directly into the stones. There were no paper blueprints. Every block bore a mark revealing its exact place in the temple. A single mistake meant 400 tons of stone were wasted, and the dangers were constant: collapses, falling rocks, sudden shifts in weight. Without safety equipment or medical care, even a small injury could turn fatal. But still thousands returned every morning. Some came willingly, earning wages and enjoying time at home between shifts. Others, Canaanites subjected to forced labor, had no choice. 1 Kings 9:21 records their burden, a burden that stretched on for years. But once the stones were cut and shaped, an even deadlier challenge began: moving them. Imagine pulling a 400-ton block across rugged mountain terrain using nothing but earthen ramps, wooden rollers, and ropes made of twisted plant fibers. 70,000 men were assigned solely to transport. They did not carve or build. They pulled. They pushed. They fought the mountains step by step. Hundreds gripped ropes as thick as a man's arm, each movement synchronized by a supervisor who shouted commands: pull, stop, reposition the rollers, pull again. Progress was measured not in meters, but in inches, sometimes just a few centimeters each hour. Men slept beside the stones. They ate there. They could not leave until the block reached Jerusalem, even if it took weeks to move 5 kilometers. And the greatest danger came from the ropes themselves. Worn by constant friction and crushing weight, fibers snapped suddenly, violently. When a rope broke, the shift of weight was explosive. Men were thrown forward, others were trapped beneath the sliding stone, crushed before they could scream. There was no compensation for families. You died, and another man took your place the next morning. Israelite workers endured the suffering because their system allowed 1 month of labor followed by 2 months at home. But the Canaanites had no such relief. They pulled those stones for 7 long years, many collapsing from exhaustion, injuries, or disease. Mortality among transport crews was the highest of the entire project. And yet, when the stones finally arrived in Jerusalem, the challenge did not end. The rule of silence still stood. No iron tools could strike them. A stone set even a finger width off could not be tapped into place with a hammer. It had to be pulled back, set on rollers again, and maneuvered precisely. Supervisors measured every angle, every edge. Mistakes meant punishment, lashes, reduced rations, or worse. The pressure was immense, but the work never slowed, and stones were only half the story. 200 kilometers to the north, the majestic cedar forests of Lebanon held the wood Solomon needed. But how do you bring thousands of massive logs from another country without trucks, without highways, without machines? And how many men paid the price along the way? The difficulty was not just the distance, it was what the distance demanded. 200 kilometers of mountains, valleys, rivers, and foreign land stood between Jerusalem and the wood essential to God's house. The task would become one of the most extraordinary supply operations of the ancient world, a testament not only to human labor, but to the unwavering determination behind Solomon's dream. Before we continue, take a moment to subscribe to Kingdom Stories. Your support helps us bring these ancient mysteries to life, revealing the beauty, the sacrifice, and the faith woven into every chapter of Scripture. Like and share this video so more people can discover the extraordinary story behind Solomon's temple, a story that still inspires wonder after 3,000 years. 200 kilometers separated Jerusalem from the cedar forests of Lebanon. 200 kilometers of mountains, valleys, rivers, and lands that did not belong to Israel. And yet Solomon needed thousands of cedar logs, because cedar was not just wood. It was the most precious building material of the ancient world. Strong, fragrant, resistant to decay, used by kings to raise palaces and temples. But it grew only in the high mountains of Lebanon. Israel had none. So Solomon did what a wise king would do. He sought partnership. His negotiation with Hiram, king of Tyre, is preserved in 1 Kings 5:6-11. Hiram would provide expert lumberjacks and all the cedar required. In exchange, Israel would supply him yearly with 20,000 cors of wheat, more than 4 million litres, and 20,000 baths of olive oil, another 2 million litres. It was an incredibly expensive agreement, almost shocking in scale, but Solomon had no choice. Without cedar, there would be no temple. 10,000 Israelite workers were assigned to labor in Lebanon, but they were not stationed there permanently. 1 Kings 5:14 explains their rotation. 1 month in Lebanon, 2 months at home. Adoniram, appointed supervisor, managed the entire schedule. Month after month, 10,000 men climbed the steep Lebanese mountains to work beside the Sidonian lumberjacks, skilled men who knew how to fell ancient trees that had stood for centuries, towering giants whose roots had held firm through storms and generations. Together, they cut the trunks into manageable sections, preparing them for the long journey south. But cutting the cedar was the easy part. The hardest challenge was getting the timber to Israel. The transportation happened in 2 stages. First, by sea. The logs were tied together into massive rafts, each one steered and pushed by smaller escorting boats. These floating platforms drifted along the Mediterranean until they reached the port of Joppa, known today as part of Tel Aviv. The journey took days, and the sea was not gentle. Storms could rise without warning. Ropes snapped. Logs disappeared beneath the waves. Yet it remained the fastest and most efficient way to move such immense weight across long distances. Second, by land. From Joppa to Jerusalem was only about 60 kilometers, but the journey felt far longer. Each cedar log weighed tons, and the transport method was the same used for the great stones, rolling them on smaller trunks, pulling them with ropes, inch by inch. But unlike stone, cedar was fragile. One careless drag on the ground could scratch the surface, split the grain, or ruin its integrity. So the workers had to be gentle, patient, and precise. A single log could take weeks to reach Jerusalem. The men slept under the open sky, eating small rations of bread, lentils, and water. Many fell ill from exposure, exhaustion, or infection. There were no physicians trained to treat them. If a man became too weak to continue, he was replaced. And if he died, his family learned only when the shift rotation ended and he did not return home. It was harsh, it was painful, but it was effective. The cedar always arrived. Yet bringing stones and wood to Jerusalem was only half the battle. There was a rule, one strict command, that made everything 10 times harder. The temple had to be built in absolute silence. No clashing of iron, no ringing of metal against stone. Imagine the tension. One slip of a hammer, one accidental strike, and supervisors would rush over, ready to punish. This was not merely a construction guideline, it was a command recorded in 1 Kings 6:7, and no one dared break it. But this raises a question that almost feels impossible to answer. How do you construct a building 30 meters tall, using stones weighing hundreds of tons and cedar beams thicker than a man's body, without making noise? How do you assemble each piece without tapping it into place? How do you correct mistakes without the sound of iron tools? The answer was preparation. Total, flawless, disciplined preparation. Everything had to be completed before the materials reached Mount Moriah. Every stone cut to its exact size. Every beam measured down to the millimeter, every socket, every angle, every joint mapped and carved in advance. There was no second chance on the construction site. Architects and master builders created a marking system, symbols carved directly into the stones while still in the quarries, Hebrew letters, numbers, directional indicators, each mark pointing to the exact place where the block would stand. When a stone reached Jerusalem, workers simply read the markings and set it into place. No measuring, no chiseling, no adjustments. And if the stone didn't fit, the mistake wasn't fixed on site. The blame traced back to the quarry, and someone paid for it. The work site was a world of silent motion, hundreds of men communicating with gestures, shifting massive stones using wooden levers, wedges and ropes. Every movement was slow and calculated. One wrong signal could bring thousands of pounds crashing down. And still, not a single iron sound rang out across the sacred mountain. This silence was not just practical, it was spiritual. God had declared that his house must be treated with reverence even during construction. Metal tools were considered profane. Every stone placed in silence became an act of worship. The 3,300 supervisors ensured this sacred rule remained unbroken. They patrolled constantly, watching every movement, listening for the slightest metallic echo. Punishments ranged from lashes to reduced rations, or in severe cases, expulsion. For Canaanite forced laborers, expulsion could mean prison or something worse. For Israelite workers, it meant shame. And so, in a strange unity of fear, devotion and duty, the workers obeyed until the temple slowly rose stone by stone, without noise, without error. But silence was not enough. The temple was destined to shine. Its inner sanctuary would be covered in 27 tons of pure gold. But working with such enormous quantities of gold required expertise far beyond ordinary craftsmanship, and that expert was a man named Hiram of Tyre, not an Israelite, but a Phoenician artisan renowned for his mastery of bronze and metalwork. 2 Kings 7:13-14 describes him as the son of a widow from Naphtali, filled with wisdom, understanding, and unparalleled skill. Bronze alone would have been impressive, but gold, soft, malleable, radiant, was a far greater challenge. Furnaces burned day and night, melting gold in the scorching heat. Sweat poured from the workers' faces as they hammered thin sheets over carved wooden forms. Every mistake cost a fortune. Every imperfection had to be corrected until the walls gleamed like mirrors. And through it all, Hiram oversaw every detail, shaping the artistry that transformed the temple from a building into a wonder. 1 Kings 6:20-22 describes a sight that almost feels unreal. The inner sanctuary of the temple, the Holy of Holies, measured 9 meters long, 9 meters wide, and 9 meters high, a perfect cube designed for the presence of God. And every surface of that sacred room was covered in pure gold. The walls, the ceiling, even the floor shimmered with light. This was not paint, nor a thin layer of gilding. These were thousands of hammered gold plates, fastened carefully over cedar. It was beauty crafted with fire, sweat, and extraordinary skill. Preparing those plates was grueling work. Pure gold is soft and delicate, capable of being hammered into sheets as thin as paper, but only in the hands of a master. Craftsmen heated small amounts of gold until soft, then placed them on stone anvils. Strike, turn, strike again, slowly shaping each piece until it reached perfect uniformity. Hours were spent on each plate, and thousands were required to cover the temple's interior. The furnaces never rested. They roared day and night, burning mountains of firewood to maintain the extreme temperatures needed. Men worked in shifts because no one could endure the heat for long. Sweat dripped, hands blistered, rags smoldered in their grasp. The gold itself came from Solomon's vast wealth, tribute, mining, and gifts from foreign rulers. 1 Kings 10:14 records that Solomon received 660 talents of gold annually, more than 22 tons each year. Much of that precious metal was poured directly into the temple, and gold adorned far more than the walls. Massive cherubim of carved wood, each 4.5 meters tall, stood within the Holy of Holies with wings stretching from wall to wall, covered entirely in gold. The altar of incense, the tables, the chains, everything gleamed. Crafting these objects required multiple layers of artistry. Sculptors shaped the wood. Metalworkers pressed gold leaf over every curve. Then came the polishing, hours of refining until not a blemish remained. It was engineering elevated to worship. At the center of this craftsmanship stood Hiram of Tyre. He was no ordinary artisan. Scripture describes him as a man full of wisdom and skill, the son of a widow from Naphtali, trained by a master in Tyre. He oversaw every bronze and gold detail. Under his hands rose the legendary bronze columns, Jachin and Boaz, each 8 meters tall, and the enormous bronze basin supported by 12 oxen. Every piece reflected mastery and devotion. But all the gold, cedar, and stone meant nothing without one essential force: coordination. How do you organize 150,000 workers scattered across quarries, forests, furnaces, and the construction site in Jerusalem? How do you ensure everything is carved, transported, and assembled in exactly 7 years and 255 days? There were no extensions. Solomon had promised that the temple would be finished in the 11th year of his reign. Every delay risked failure. The answer lay in the supervisors, 3,300 of them, as recorded in 1 Kings 5:16. These men didn't cut stone or fell trees or hammer gold. They managed people. They maintained order across a vast network of tasks, and above them were 550 chief officers, 2 Kings 9:23, who reported directly to Solomon himself. The pressure on their shoulders was immense. Each supervisor oversaw roughly 45 workers. They knew every man's strengths and weaknesses. They knew who worked quickly, who needed guidance, and who required discipline. Before sunrise each day, the supervisors gathered their teams, handed out assignments, explained priorities, and watched over them until sunset. Absence was not tolerated. Anyone who failed to appear was replaced instantly. Slow workers received warnings. 3 warnings led to punishment. Yet the system wasn't driven by fear alone. Supervisors also rewarded excellence. Israelites who completed their 1-month shifts received wages of grain, oil, and wine, enough to support their families during the 2 months they spent at home. Some teams received extra rations when they worked efficiently. This created momentum, competition, and pride. And remarkably, throughout 7 years of intense labor, no major disaster halted the project. No revolt, no war, no plague. The work flowed forward, stone after stone, beam after beam, gold plate after gold plate. Finally, in the 8th month of Solomon's 11th year, the very last piece was set into place. The temple, the most impossible architectural achievement of the ancient world, stood complete. But the story did not end with its completion. Months later, during the Feast of Tabernacles, Israel gathered for the dedication. 1 Kings 8 paints a breathtaking picture. All Israel assembled. Priests carried the Ark of the Covenant into the Holy of Holies. Solomon prayed before the people, asking God to dwell among them. And then something happened that no one could have anticipated. A cloud filled the temple. It was not smoke, not mist. It was the glory of the Lord, thick, overwhelming, radiant, so powerful that the priests could not remain standing to minister. 1 Kings 8:10-11 says they had to leave because the glory of God filled the house. For the workers who had survived the years of danger, the falling stones, the snapping ropes, the scorching furnaces, witnessing that moment was something beyond reward. They had built a home for God himself. In celebration, Solomon offered 22,000 cattle and 120,000 sheep, numbers that reflected the magnitude of what had been accomplished. The temple, the greatest and most impossible structure of antiquity, was complete, a triumph of labor, faith, and divine presence.